We have a new chance for a solar storm that could bring aurora down to high latitudes, and a huge active region rotates into Earth view, and it's firing solar flares and solar storms. What does that mean for us? Those stories and more in the news this week. Solar activity really picks up this week. It started with a few gorgeous eruptions we had on the sun, and now we're waiting for some fast wind from this weakening coronal hole that's now rotated into the Earth strike zone. It should be sending us some moderately fast wind that might bump us up to active conditions if we're lucky, but it should give us some decent aurora views, especially at high latitudes for you aurora photographers. Now, the big story, though, is region 2699. We were watching this region emerge on the sun's backside, and it started firing off B and C class flares, even a couple solar storms. And now that it's rotated into Earth view, it's boosted the solar flux, which is great news for you amateur radio operators and emergency responders. You should be enjoying some decent radio propagation right now. And then as we watch this thing rotate close to the Earth strike zone, bam! It lights off a near M-class flare. This is the first we've seen in quite some time, folks, and it's almost a radio blackout, but it's almost as if the sun is celebrating the Falcon Heavy launch that we saw that SpaceX put up just yesterday. And with David Bowie's Starman lighting the way to Mars, it looks like this is going to be a fun week. Switching to your M-flare threat meter, you can see before region 2699 came into view, we were actually sitting at very low solar flux and X-ray flux, really just hovering below the B floor. But then at the end of February 4th, you can see everything changed. Region 2699 came into view and wham! Up goes the X-ray flux and the solar flux. Amateur radio operators told me that it was almost like a light switch flipping on with radio propagation. Suddenly they could hear on the bands again. And that's what we've been dealing with ever since. We're kind of hovering between the B and the C class floor and the X-ray flux. And so we're just kind of sitting there waiting and watching, trying to figure out what this region's going to do. And sure enough, bam, on the 7th, we get a near M flare. We get some decent noise, not quite a radio blackout, but it's getting close. So it looks to us that region 2699 might actually be becoming an M flare player. Switching to our solar storm conditions, you can see we've actually been pretty quiet for easily over the past week. As a matter of fact, if we want to get back to active conditions, we have to look back to the last week in January. Now, we almost made active conditions in the first few days of February, and this was due to some fast wind from a coronal hole, but really the wind kind of just ramped on very gently. We never got really slammed by it at Earth, so it never really gave us the intensity of the storm we were looking for. Nonetheless, it gave us some gorgeous aurora at high latitudes, which lasted over a few days. And since then, we've kind of slowly just calmed down and quieted down. But this won't last. We are hoping to get a little bit more fast wind, moderately fast wind, from that coronal hole that's going to be rotating into the Earth strike zone here in the next couple days. And it might bump us up back to easily to unsettled, maybe even active conditions. So what else does the sun have in store for us this week? Well, this is stereo A. It's our backside monitor. You can see here's Earth, here's the sun, and here's stereo A staring at the sun from behind. And what you can immediately see is region 2699 emerging and forming on the backside of the sun. It was almost explosive in its growth early on, and now it's rotated into Earth view, and it's still firing off its solar flares and solar storms. So we are keeping a close eye on it to see whether or not it becomes an M-flare player. Meanwhile, we also have this arrow-looking coronal hole. Now, this is the one that caused some almost solar storm levels last time it rotated into the Earth strike zone. So it will give us yet another chance for some solar storming in about 2 weeks. Switching to our solar storm conditions and aurora possibilities over the coming week, we are anticipating the hit from that moderately fast wind from that coronal hole that's rotating into the Earth strike zone. At high latitudes, NOAA is expecting unsettled conditions with up to a 30% chance of a minor storm. Now, at mid-latitudes, we're only expecting normal to unsettled conditions with about a 25% chance of active conditions over the next couple days. But remember, it's kind of hard to deal with a collapsing coronal hole like what we're seeing here, and the predictions are a little bit difficult to gauge. So this could be a decent solar storm, or it could be a fizzle. Switching to your solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, what a difference a day makes. Region 2699 has definitely captured our attention, and we are back into the yellow when it comes to M-flare risk. This means you emergency responders and amateur radio operators, you're definitely experiencing some noise on the bands right now, and you could be at risk for a small radio blackout or so. We're not completely in the clear. It also means you GPS users and GNSS users, you might have some issues, especially at the dawn-dusk terminators where GPS is oftentimes affected anyway. And this just adds a little extra stuff for you to deal with. But nice thing is that we don't have any threat for solar radiation storms at this time. 2699 just isn't a big enough player for that. But we do have marginal propagation back on the radio bands, and this condition should last us easily for the next 10 days or so. I just wanted to say what an amazing time it is to be alive, to watch that Falcon Heavy successfully launch such a precious payload into space. And this is a game changer, because not only can we sing about life on Mars, but we actually get a chance to go there. But this means that space weather is going to become that much more important to our daily lives. And I can't think of a better way to herald in this new era than to send Major Tom off in a red roadster to the red planet. Bravo, SpaceX. Bravo. So the space weather this week is very exciting. We're waiting right now for some moderately fast wind from this weakening coronal hole. It should be hitting us here in the next day or so. We're not expecting a big storm, but it could bring some aurora down to high latitudes, so you aurora photographers, you might get some action. Now, meanwhile, we've got region 2699 that's rotated into view, and it has not disappointed. It's been firing off solar flares and solar storms, none of them Earth-directed as of yet, but as it's rotating closer to the Earth strike zone, it's lit off a near M-class flare. So what this means for you amateur radio operators and emergency responders is that you're getting some noise on the bands, and you do have to be on the lookout for a radio blackout or so. And then you GPS and GNSS users, you guys are probably okay, but just be a little bit more cautious during the dawn and dusk times when GPS has a tendency to be a bit more susceptible anyway, because this just adds a little bit of squirreliness to the mix. But outside of that, we're going to be keeping a strong eye on region 2699 to see if it's going to send any more fireworks off to Major Tom. I'm Tamitha Skov. Thank you for watching.